There are some salt deposits in the Precambrian as well, but they are not very important in occurrence, but they are isolated in occurrence. But you get in Cambrian, you get in Permian. Some of the best Permian, some of the best salt deposit, what you get the Permian Jextane deposit, in North Sea, which is about 2 kilometer thick. 2 kilometer thick salt deposit. 2 kilometer thick salt. We also get in Jurassic, and some best of the salt deposit we also get in the Miocene. These are the times where you get in the rock record some very good salt deposition. As I discussed in the Permian Jextane, it is thick as 2 kilometers. Now we will discuss what are the problems of this salt deposit and how a thick salt deposit can form, and what is the problem in that. Now, first of all, salt in a rock salt, what we are talking about, that they are basically present in the geological succession. So they are rock salt. They are soluble. Number one, what are the problem? The number one is soluble, and they are extremely susceptible to deformation. They act as a very ductile material, and that's why the original signature of the initial salt deposit often not preserved in the rock record. First of all, they are soluble, and then they are susceptible to deformation. So what we get that any salt deposits which is more than 25 million year in age, within those salt deposits, the original structure preservation is very, very low. So just more than 25, that you can see that even in the Miocene, which is actually more than 25, then you are not getting any kind of the original signature within the salt. So how then we interpret the formation of the salt deposit? That is the problem. That is essentially the problem. Now, what are the minerals that we get in the salt deposit? What are the minerals that we get in the salt deposit? So we get basically chlorides, sulfates, and different complex salt. The three most important salt deposits what we get in nature is the mineral, that is gypsum, anhydrite, and halite. Okay, then you get a series of complex salt solvent. So gypsum, CaSO4, gypsum, anhydrite, CaSO4, 2H2, halite, NaC. These are the three major minerals. That is, these are sulfate, this is chloride. You get a number of complex salt as well. The complex salt such as sylvite, arnolite, kyanite, and there are several complex salts. Those are, so if you, people have seen that at what condition actually you get the salt deposition. You require the salinity of the water column should be very high, and for that, how you make the salinity of the water column very high? Where you have a extreme evaporation. So the evaporation should be high, and the dilution of the water column by entry of the new and fresh water, that should be minimum. So that if you can restrict the water column and evaporate it, then you can increase the salinity. Now, there is an experiment that if I start with the marine water in a bucket and then try to see as I evaporate and decrease the volume of seawater, how the different minerals that get precipitated. And it is observed when you have the volume of the water that is half of its original volume, then you start the carbonate precipitation. So the first thing that start precipitation when you are basically decreasing the volume of the seawater by means of evaporation is carbonate. And the carbonate starts when the original volume decreases to its half. Now you further start decreasing, and what you will see that at about 15 to 10% of its original volume, then you start getting the gypsum and anhydrite, the sulfate salts there. And almost less than 10% of the original volume, then you get the halide. The complex salts are formed when the original volume comes down below 5% of its original volume. When the volume comes below 5% of the original volume, at that time the complex salts that they come. So what I said, that if I start with the original seawater and start it decreasing by means of evaporation, its original volume, at 50% of its volume, carbonate starts precipitating. At about 15 to 20% of its original volume, then the sulfate starts, then about 10% the halide starts, and less than 5% the complex salts that will be. So you can see that you require a extreme saturation and extreme evaporation for the deposition of the salt. That is very good. Okay, fine. Now, what are the major structures? How we get the salt deposit in the rock? How we get the salt deposit in the rock? Is there any question? Okay. If there is no question, then we come on to the occurrence of the salt deposit. Occurrence. There are several different kinds of occurrence. Number one is nodular. Nodular. Then you get the laminated. Number three is massive. These are the three major types of salt occurrence. What is nodular? It is a lump-like development of the salt. That means you have the salt lump, then salt lump, then salt lump, salt lump, salt lump. And in between these areas that may be occupied by shale, carbonate, chert, all these things that may be in between. And the salts, this is salt, this is salt, this is salt, this is salt, this is salt. And the salt, you may have some inclusion of original shale inclusion or quartz inclusion, carbonate inclusion. That you know, because salt, it is precipitating and replacing these lithologies. So that we call the displacive growth. Displacive growth. They are displacing the original lithology and growing in size. Okay? Sometimes these nodules, they may become more elongated. Large, elongated, and ellipsoidal. they may get the large elongated and ellipsoidal. And between two nodules, the lithology, whether it is shale, carbonate chart, they become very thin, very thin. Then this kind of elongated ellipsoidal nodules with very thin interbeds of shale carbonate, that is, we call it the structure called chicken wire structure. Chicken wire structure. That is called chicken wire structure. This is one type of occurrence of the evaporite in this kind of lithology. That you get the nodules, and when nodules become larger, elliptical, and they grow in size, and the host lithology become like a small stringers between them, then you call it a chicken wire structure. Okay. Then come on to the laminated. How the laminated things are there? It can be millimeter to centimeter thick laminae, which is interbedded with shale carbonate or chalk. Thin laminae. And those laminae may be trapped for several hundreds of meters, if not kilometers, in some cases. And that, if I have thin laminae of salt, and interbedded with shale, or interbedded with carbonate, and it is running for several tens of meter to hundreds of meter kilometer scale. This is only possible when it is a quiet and the energy condition of the environment is very low. So those who were basically describing this kind of thing, that they are maintaining a uniform laminae for a long distance, they propound not that always the evaporite will be very shallow water deposit, because in very shallow waters are calm and the consistent laminae cannot form. So then they started that what I said initially, that always there you require a very high saturation, high evaporation, where you expect these things to happen. You expect these things to happen in the very shallow marine condition. But can a very shallow marine condition that can describe this consistent, laterally consistent evaporite laminae in alternation with the shale or the carbonate? That cannot. So there lies a problem. Those who have described this kind of occurrence of the evaporite, they started arguing that not that always the laminae that you get in the evaporite, they will be formed in a very extremely shallow water condition, and there may be some other mechanism by which both the conditions can be satisfied, the deep water as well as the presence of supersaturation because of evaporation. Am I clear what I am trying to tell?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there lies a debate. So the debate started when this laminated evaporite started described. So a debate between the shallow water and deep water. This debate started. Now, laminated evaporite also people have described the laminae that is forming something like this. Evaporite laminae in alternation with shale. This kind of laminae people have described. Now, this kind of laminae, they describe this as enderolithic laminae. Enderolithic laminae. Enderolithic laminae. And when they studied this kind of laminae, they found that these laminae are basically forming by means of coalescing. So actually there are nodules, they are coalescing with one another. They are coalescing with one another and forming this kind of a lamina, which is not actually. So those who are believe in the nodular theory and the shallow water hypothesis, they then started showing this kind of laminae and started claiming, no, whatever the laminae you are getting, this is actually the coalescing of the nodules and formation of the laminae. These are coalescing, which many of the laminated evaporite propounder, they didn't agree to that. Well, no, always it is not like that. There are uniform and planar laminae as well. Okay, so there is a debate. Now, we will come to the different models of evaporite and try to answer that how we address this different kind of debate. How we answer this different kind of debate. Okay. Then comes on to the massive unit. Massive unit where you do not get any structure, internal structure, and a thick bed of evaporite. No internal structure and a thick bed of evaporite. So much thickness, as I discussed in the Permian Jexten, you have a 2 kilometer thick evaporite. Now, it is again a problem. If I have a shallow water, shallow bathymetry, how can I account for 2 kilometer thickness of the evaporite? There is no much space to accommodate that thick evaporite. So there lies another problem. And the most important problem that people started facing, that how you can generate so much of evaporite. But people have seen, if I evaporate 1,000 meter of depth of water column, a ocean water column of 1,000 meter depth, 1,000 meter depth water column of the ocean, if I evaporate, I only get 15 meter thickness of evaporite. 15 meter thickness of evaporite. But people have calculated that if entire Mediterranean Sea is actually evaporated, then you only get 60 meter of evaporite. 60 meter of evaporite. If this is the condition, then how a evaporite of deposit of 2 kilometer thickness is forming? That is a big problem, and this problem has been addressed by the problem of saline giants. This problem was addressed by this term, problem of saline giants. Is the problem clear to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that is a problem, and a person whose name is Kenneth Shue. He actually addressed this problem. That how the saline giants can be formed, despite there is a huge restriction of formation of the evaporites. And there are proponents of shallow water evaporite model, proponents of deep water evaporite model. So how then I am the different models that can satisfy this idea. So there are Please draw the three figures, then I am explaining.
Sir, the last figure is not visible.
So, have you drawn the upper two?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
So, as I discussed with you, that there was a debate between the shallow water model and deep water. Now, what are problems? Problems are that if I believe in the shallow water, then I cannot explain the laterally extensive laminated evaporite, number one. And number two, the generation of a evaporite deposit of 2 kilometer thickness, because that accommodation of 2 kilometer I cannot explain from the shallow water. If I go to the deep water, then my problem is that kind of salinity and that kind of supersaturation, it will be difficult to attain the deep water. So then how I will be accommodating both the situations? How I will be accommodating both the situations? And then, so there are different people, they try to explain it through different models. But in all models, one thing is two things are everybody has taken care of two things. One, that there will be evaporation, active evaporation. Number two, there will not be a regular mixing of the water column. The water column should be restricted and not regularly mixed with the open ocean water column. If you regularly mix, then the saturation level never will be achieved. Okay? But you need to replenish the water. Because if you are supersaturated some water column and the evaporite is deposited, then unless you replenish, then a thick deposit cannot form. So you have to regularly replenish the water, but not mixing the water so much that the saturation level goes very down. So these two things everyone has taken notice. So what they propose three different models. That is shallow water deep basin model, shallow water shallow basin model, and deep water deep basin. First is the shallow water deep basin model. Here the basin is deep and the basin is only getting replenishment. Basin is separated from the open ocean by means of a seal. By means of a seal, the basin is separated from open ocean. It is a seal separated basin. And it is intermittently getting replenishment by means of the permeability of the seal. It is not a very high end or the high speed or the high flow replenishment, but a regular seepage to the seal is causing the replenishment of it, and the basin is forming this. Okay, but the evaporation is only in the shallow level. Then people also describe a shallow water shallow basin model. They say no, the entire thing is in a shallow basin, not a deep basin, shallow basin and shallow water. So what they say is that it is a shallow water and there is a continuous, what we call the evaporative drawdown. Evaporative drawdown. And because of evaporative drawdown, the more water getting evaporated, and from the capillary, the more water that is seeping in. And there is some seepage from the seal, and the basin is subsiding basin is subsiding, regularly subsiding. So though it is shallow water and it is forming, and because of its subsidence, it allows the deposition of a thick deposit. Is it clear what I am saying here?
No, sir. Can you please read this second diagram?
Oh, what is happening here? It is a shallow basin. Now there is evaporation, and because of this evaporation, these evaporites, they are getting deposited. Now there are two ways it is getting replenished. One is the evaporative drawdown. So the water which is within the pore spaces of the sediment, they through capillary pressure, they are coming up and getting evaporated again. So that is the way, and some intermittent seepage through the seal, that is also supplying some. So both this and this, that is causing the regular low end supply in the basin, and that is getting evaporated. Along with that, the basin is actively subsiding also. Unless it subsides, it cannot generate a thick deposit, because the accommodation will not be, because every evaporite is forming, it is subsiding. New space is available for the new evaporite to form. So it is a shallow water, shallow basin with the active subsidence that possibly is causing this. Because those who are proponent of the shallow water basin, initially a maximum problem was how the accommodation is getting generated and how we can account for the thick evaporite deposit. So they accounted that by means of the subsidence theory. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the third one, that is the deep water, deep basin model. Some people, they said, no, it is not that. It is a deep water and deep basin. So the accommodation is not a problem. Even if you do not have the subsidence, even if there is no subsidence, then also you can get a thick deposit, because you are actually providing accommodation because of the deep water. And you have the supply to the seal and some occasional overflow that is possibly supplying it, and but the deposit is not from the top but from the bottom, and the entire accommodation is actually supplying space for the thick deposit. What is the difference between first and third? In first, the evaporite is forming in the shallow, but the basin is deep. In the third, the evaporite itself is forming in the deep, and the basin is also deep. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So these three models that has been proposed. And what the name I said, Kenneth Su, he actually came up with all three models. And he said that from area to area, the description of the evaporite should be done based on the available texture, based on the available nature, its lateral extensiveness, its thickness, and the associated sediment, and any of this model, which model is based for which occurrence of the evaporite, that needs to be judged. Okay? No one can say that this model will describe all. Each model has its own advantage, each model has its own disadvantage. But we should know all the models, so that when we go for working in the evaporite, then seeing that what is the kind of evaporite I am getting. Am I getting a nodular evaporite? Am I getting a chicken wire evaporite? Am I getting a massive evaporite or a laminated evaporite? How is the character of the laminae? Are these laminae enterolithic laminae, or this laminae is a laterally extensive laminae without any deformation? So we need to see all these textures and structures of the evaporite, its association, then come up with a model which is best suited for it. Okay? Is there any question in evapotite? Otherwise, I will go to phosphorite now. Okay. We then go to phosphorite. Phosphorite. Okay, one thing I just forgot to mention in evapotite. That is the gypsum anhydride anomaly. The gypsum anhydride anomaly. What is that? That if you see the modern evaporites, they are either, you do not get anhydride in modern, you do not get gypsum in the modern evaporites. I am wrong. I'm totally wrong. You get gypsum in modern evaporites. You do not get anhydride in the modern evaporites. I repeat my statement. You get gypsum in the modern evaporites, but you do not get anhydride in the modern evaporites. But if you go to the ancient succession, suppose Permian, suppose Cambrian, suppose Miocene, what we get anhydride, we do not get gypsum. Am I clear what I am saying?
Yes, sir.
This is because gypsum is a hydrated variety of anhydride. And when you get the ancient succession, then the water molecule from the gypsum that gets shaded off, and that becomes the anhydride. So this is an anomaly from the modern evaporite and the ancient evaporite. In the ancient evaporite, we always get the anhydride, but in modern evaporite, we get the gypsum. So CaSO4 2H2O. So this H2O component that gets shed off, and you get the anhydride. So this is what is called the gypsum anhydride anomaly in the ancient succession and the modern evaporite succession. Okay, I just forgot to mention. There is no problem with NaCl because there is no water component there. NaCl is similar in the ancient succession and the modern succession, but the problem comes with sulfate. In the sulfate phase, that the gypsum is in the modern but anhydride in the ancient. Now we come on to the phosphorite. This is another very important mineral, and which is a non-metallic deposit also. It is considered as a, both evaporite also is considered as a non-metallic deposit. Similarly, phosphorite is also considered as a non-metallic deposit. In total world, the total phosphorite deposit is about 1,58,000 million metric ton. This is the total world's phosphorite deposit amount. And phosphorites, they are prevalent in the geological record right from the Precambrian through the Holocene. You get the phosphorites through the geological record. The oldest phosphorite deposit in the world, that is in India, that is Jhamarkotra phosphorite. Oldest. The Paleoproterozoic phosphorite, that is in the Jhamarkotra area. In Rajasthan, Udar. And it is a stromatolitic phosphorite. There are different times in the geological history you get the good phosphorite deposit. You get in Cambrian, you get in Pennsylvania, you get in Jurassic, you get in Cretaceous, Upper Cretaceous, then you get the Eocene, Miocene, you get the phosphorite, different time. Okay? Now, how really the phosphorites that is formed? How really the phosphorites that is formed? That itself becomes a problem. Why? The reason is that if you see the normal abundance, if you do normal any sedimentary rock or even in the igneous rock, you do the bulk analysis by the measured element chemistry. Then you get the P2O5. Phosphorus is there in every rock. But the percentage is less than 1%. You see, any igneous rock, if you do the measured element analysis, any sedimentary rock, you get the measured element analysis, you get the P2O5. And the P2O5 is normally less than 1% or less than 0.5%. But when you get a phosphorite deposit, then you get a P2O5 content that is about 15 to 20%, sometimes it is about 40%. That means the phosphorus content, it goes more than 10%. Now, how this concentration of phosphorus that is happening in the geological record? Though the Clark value of P2O5 in all igneous rock, sedimentary rock, that is less than 1%, but we are getting some phosphorite deposit where it is about 40% P2O5 and about more than 10% of phosphorus. So this concentration is very, very important. What people have found that in the river water, where from this phosphorus is coming? This phosphorus, where from this phosphorus? Now you see, phosphorus is a absolute necessity for any living being, right from phytoplankton to us, human being. What is the major constitution of our bone? It is phosphorus. Our bones are made up of calcium and phosphorus. If you have a phosphorus deficiency in your body, your bones will start breaking. So you understand the necessity of the phosphorus. Even a phytoplankton, if you analyze the phytoplankton, the phosphorus content is 0.4%. 0.4% in a phytoplankton. But if you see in the river water, what is the phosphorus percent? 15 ppb. 15 ppb in the river water. It is 15 ppb. In marine water, about 70 ppb. In phytoplankton, 0.4%. And a phosphorite deposit, there P2O5, you get about as high as 40% with phosphorus content that is more than 10%. How this enrichment of phosphorite that is taking place, that is exactly the issue. That is exactly the issue of any phosphorite deposit. Now, what are the different types of, so this is the problem of phosphorite that I have just explained to you, that what exactly is the problem of phosphorite. Now, let us see how we get the phosphorite and how we get the phosphorite. We get phosphorite in form of laminated phosphorite, bedded phosphorite, massive, pebble bed phosphorite, and guano. All these are occurrence of the phosphorite. And what we get in the phosphorite deposit, the different textures of the carbonate rocks. Suppose void, phalloid, bioclast, all these you also get in a phosphorite deposit. So many of the phosphorites in the world, that is basically people have described them as a altered product of carbonate. As I have said, in our Jhamarpotra, you see the stromatolitic phosphorite. So all stromatolites were originally carbonate, now they are phosphate. When we call something as a phosphorite, when the P2O5 content, that is more than 15%. In the bulk rock composition, you get P2O5. If you get it less than 10%, suppose 6%, 8%, 9%, then we call it a phosphatic. We do not call it phosphorite, we call it phosphatic. Suppose phosphatic shell, phosphatic limestone. And then something called phosphorite. You have to have the phosphate P2O5 content more than 15%. And these phosphorites are the major contributor for all the fertilizer industry. All the fertilizer industry. Because the phosphate is the major constituent of all the fertilizers. It is not only that it is constituting our body, it is also a major constituent for the agriculture and our food. Now, how these different types of phosphorus, so the laminated, bedded, they are basically laminated along with shale, carbonate, charred. So with them, the phosphorite, you may find the laminated, the lamines of the phosphorite. Or you get sometimes the massive. Pebble bed phosphorite, that is basically the phosphorite when it is reworked in the form of pebble, in the different kind of the, suppose you get the fish scale, the vertebrate bone, the coprolite. So they are made up of vertebrate bone, coprolite, fish scale, bone, all these. They are mechanically in the form of pebbles. You get accumulated, you call it pebble. And guano. Guano is nothing but the excreta of birds. The most common in Peru, in South America, in Peru, Chile, those areas, you get the huge deposit of the bird excreta. That is also the huge phosphorite. That are mine and surface mine. That is called guano. So the basic problem with the phosphorite, what is the basic problem? That how I am generating such high concentration of P2O5, though the marine water and the river water, their phosphate content is very, very low. And how I am concentrating? So to explain that, the theory that is proposed is the two-step theory. One is chemical, biochemical. Number 2, mechanical. Two-step theory. What they said, to increase the concentration of P2O5 as high as 40%, 45%, you require two-step enrichment process. First enrichment is chemical biochemical, second enrichment is mechanical. First we start discussing the chemical biochemical. Okay, before I go into it, let me also discuss a little bit about the phosphate mineralogy, which I have not discussed yet. What are phosphate minerals? The most important mineral of phosphate is apatite. What is the Ca5PO4 whole 3? This is the formula of apatite. We can also have the amorphous variety called colophane, which is a amorphous variety where the composition is not firmly established. It is an amorphous variety of phosphate where the composition not firmly established. Then we call it a colophane. Okay. Now, this apatite can be again of 3 different types. That is fluoroapatite, Ca5PO4 and 3L. Fluoroapatite, CO, and hydroxyapatite. Can you see the lower part of the board? No. Hello?
Yes, sir, we can see.
Okay. So these apatites, they can be fluoroapatite, chloroapatite, or hydroxyapatite. All 3 forms can be there. But the most common base what we get in nature, even modern, that is the hydrocarbonapatite. That is what they do. That is Ca10 CO3 PO4 6 OH. That is, so you can see the carbonate that is also replacing the phosphate. So calcium carbonate with phosphate and hydroxyl, they together, that forms the hydroxy carbonapatite. That is the most common base in nature. One thing I want to tell you, please remember this term colophane. Never call it cellophane. It is colophane. That day I was listening to one PhD Viva. The student was saying cellophane, which is completely wrong. There is nothing called cellophane. It is colophane. Okay? Now, hello. Anyone asking me anything?
No, sir.
Okay. So now I again go back to the what I was discussing. That is chemical, biochemical, and mechanical. Two process of the. First, we start with the chemical biochemical process. What is actually happening? I said that I have to make the concentration of how I make this concentration very high. So what they say, that if you see the distribution of the phosphorite, what we finally get that the distribution, modern phosphorite, I am talking about the modern phosphorite. Modern phosphorite, the distribution is mostly what we see that they are in the west coast of the continent. West coast of the continent. And those also, the maximum concentration of the phosphorite deposit that is on the west coast of the shallow tropical to temperate continents. And what they say that basically the upwelling, when there is an upwelling and they reach nutrition, reach deep water that come to the surface because of the upwelling. That basically cause the biogenic proliferation, that the huge phytoplankton growth, the phytoplankton bloom, what we call the phytoplankton bloom. What I am saying, that the upwelling and the reaching of the deep water which is reaching the nutrition to the surface, that encourages the phytoplankton boom. Now you see what I said, phytoplanktons, they contain 0.4%. So phytoplanktons, by their vital factor, they enrich the phosphate in their structure. As we also, by our vital factor, we enrich the phosphate in our structure and form our bones. If you analyze my body after burning and then see what is the phosphate content, it is much larger than the river water phosphate content and the marine phosphate. So phytoplanktons, they now after their death, they settle in the bottom anoxic condition. And get buried because of the newer and newer settlement. In this shallow diagenetic phase, shallow diagenesis, because of high residence time of this biogenic material in association with the pore water, that pore water become enriched in the phosphate, and people have analyzed those pore water in the ocean sediment, and they found that there is 1400 to 7500 ppb phosphate in that pore water. You see how much you are increasing the phosphate content in the pore water. You are basically causing a upwelling that is basically causing a phytoplankton bloom. The phytoplankton by their vital factor first enriching in their structure from 70 ppb to 0.4%. They die, they settle, and then in the shallow diagenesis with long residence time, they release that phosphate in the pore water. That pore water get enriched to the phosphate with the tune of 1400 to 7500 ppb. And what you get that if you have any carbonate or shale, anything, whatever is here, these phosphatic solutions start replacing the carbonate and shale and form the phosphate level. That is it. Fine. But can it be of such level that it is forming a 40% P2O5? No, it is not possible. I can only take it to up to 7500 ppb and it can reach up to 7.5% P2O5. But how can we reach to the 40%? So only chemical and biochemical cannot take it to the 40%. It can go up to 6 to 7%, not beyond that. But going from 70 ppb to 6 to 7% itself is a huge task to do. And that is completely done by means of shallow burial in the anoxic condition, release of phosphate, and increasing in the pore water the phosphate content, and then replacing the lithology that is present. What they say, after this, you require a sea level fall. Sea level fall. And what this sea level fall will do, that the sea level is now here. So these phosphates, which is now formed, these phosphate then get reworked, mechanically reworked. Mechanical rework. And get deposited again here by mechanical rework. And that mechanical reworking actually it increases the secondary concentration to 32 because of sea level fall and mechanical rework. Okay. So what? So then people say, then what is the major role player here? Is the major role player is the organism, their settlement and the phosphatism, or the major role player is the climate and sea level? Climate and sea level. If you have a high sea level stand, then you create the more condition of the shallow platform and the upwelling and the large shallow platform with the photic zone in the illuminated photic zone. Because of the translation, you get the more flooding in the shallow water and you get a huge span that is illuminated as well as oxygen bearing and the nutrition rich because of upwelling. So you generate a huge amount of phytoplankton that basically concentrate phosphorite and that settles. So that is one story. But can you make a phosphorite of 40% unless there is a sea level fall and there is a reworking of the original phosphorite and the reconcentration of the phosphorite? No. So they say that the climate, so there is a rise, sea level rise and sea level fall that is equally important as the importance of the phytoplanktons and the organism to concentrate phosphorite from the water. So it is a combination of the factors. You require a sea level high stand, you require a huge platform for the organic proliferation. You require the phytoplankton bloom. You require the concentration of the phosphate on the water column. All you require. But to make it a phosphorite deposit, you also require a sea level fall and mechanical reworking of the original phosphate and its reconcentration as a secondary. And people have shown that many of the phosphorite, you are getting the graded bedding, you get the cross stratification, you get the ripple mark, you get the soul mark, all these different kind of markings that people have described from phosphorite to support the mechanical transportation of the phosphorite. Okay? Is it understandable?
Yes, sir.
So, what today I will be only covering these two. I will not discuss chart. Actually, गर्मी बहुत है और बहुत problem है. So, what I discussed that I thought of discussing chart also, but thinking that I will discuss in next class. Actually, phosphorite that is not possible to form the thick phosphate deposit. It is not possible to form by a single process. You require a multi-process to form a concentrated high-grade phosphorite deposit. And this multi-process involves a chemical, biochemical, and a mechanical process. And in turn, these processes are related to sea level stand and climate. So the climate, sea level stand, the upwelling, the phytoplankton, the sea level fall, mechanical reworking. So you can see a multi-proxy, the multifarious processes that basically give rise to a rich phosphate deposit. Otherwise, it is impossible to get a rich phosphate deposit because the concentration of phosphate is very, very low in the water. And the Clark value. People, now there is another debate also, because many people believe that the all phosphate, they are basically delivered from the continental weather. But they say that in marine water, where from the phosphate comes? They say it is all river driven, and rivers are bringing it by the weathering profile of the rocks, but the igneous rocks, the sedimentary rocks, they have a Clark value of the phosphate, and that basically is. But afterwards, people also started describing, no, all this phosphate that is delivered in the ocean, not only derived by the river water, but there is a volcanic input of the phosphate as well. Volcanic input of the phosphate as well. And this volcanic input of the phosphate, that basically is also responsible. So there is a debate that how much phosphate that is continental derived and how much phosphate that is a volcanic derived. But the phosphate, whenever you are getting, that how to enrich it to a phosphorite deposit, that is a different story. So there are two different debates. The supply of phosphate originally, the concentration of the phosphate, and it's making to a phosphorite deposit. Okay? Please read those, and if you have any problem anywhere, please get back to me. I'll try to answer if I know it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here I end the class. So next class I will discuss the chart. Not feeling like discussing today, and then the last topic. Yeah, please check your syllabus. What are the other things that is in the syllabus? Is the syllabus is completed or anything more in the syllabus? Any one of you has syllabus with you?
Sir, almost completed.
Ah,
I think the
okay.
last topic was dolomite and dolomitization.
That I have already covered. That I have
Yes,
already covered. But tectonics and sedimentation is not there.
Yes, sir. है सर
Yes. Yes,
है
sir.
ना?
It is.
हाँ.
yes,
Yes.
So tectonics and sedimentation, the different tectonic settings and sedimentary basins in
Yes, sir.
different tectonic settings that will be discussed. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir.